Hello and welcome to Show and Tell with David Perel and Ana Lorena Fabrega. We were talking before we started, and Ana can't pronounce socialization. We're going to be talking about
That is
homeschooling
not
today.
true.
Try to do
That's
it.
not true.
Do it.
Socialization. There you go. I
That was
practiced
like an 8
5 times.
out of 10. 8 out of
No.
10.
Oh my gosh. Okay, fine.
Socialization.
Socialization.
And
Say
apparently,
ferrocarril, David. Say ferrocarril. Go ahead. Let me hear you.
ferrocarril.
Yeah, that's terrible.
We're talking about homeschooling today, and we're going to start with, you guessed it, show and tell. What did you bring today?
My item for today, since we're talking about homeschooling, and one of the big benefits of homeschooling is that you get to mold and shape the curriculum around the emerging interest of the kid, I decided to bring a
Sand dollar.
Yes, a sand dollar. And again, I'm at the beach. So the reason why I brought this is because homeschooling is all about learning from the real life and in real context, right? Or at least it's supposed to be. So let's say that you go out on a walk with your kids that you're homeschooling and on the beach and you come across a sand dollar. The kids are going to have so many questions and they'll probably say something like, oh my gosh, look at that pretty shell with that star shaped stamped on one side. And you can go ahead and clarify and say, well, no, this is actually a sand dollar, and it's a type of invertebrate marine animal, and it's actually relative of starfish and of the sea urchins. So you can go ahead and explain that, and it's coming again organically for something that they found. And they may ask, well, why does it look like a shell if it's not a shell? And you can go ahead and explain where actually, when the sand dollars are alive, they're not white like this. They're actually purple. And they have like these fuzzy little things and spines that they
Whoa.
use in order to get their food, right? But when they die, their skeletons get bleached by the sun, and that's why they turn white. You can go ahead and explain that they're actually carnivores, why they're called sand dollars. The kid will obviously ask why they're called sand dollars.
Why?
You can say, well, people back then thought that they looked like a large silver coin, and it reminded them of like the American or the Spanish dollar back then. And you can talk about, where you find this kind of marine animals. You find them in the tropical waters. So there's a lot of like, do you see how much learning there's going on here
Yeah.
and how much potential for like more learning there is from something that you come across walking on the beach? And that's the whole point, because this is the kind of learning that sticks. And again, I was the third and fourth grade teacher, and I would teach about this and I would introduce sand dollars, but it was completely different. I did it, okay, today we're talking about marine animals and invertebrates. Go ahead and open your textbook. This is the page, and they would see a picture. That learning is less likely to stick than this kind of learning when kids actually find it in real context and are curious, and that's when they start learning. So that's my show and tell for today. What is your show
That
and
was really good. That was
tell?
really good.
Thank you, David.
7 on the show and tell item, 10 on the explanation.
Okay, fine, I'll take it. We
I
should
meant
do
that
a
as a
poll.
compliment. I meant that as a compliment. Okay, this is mine. So, I believe that one of the things that I think is really interesting about where learning is going is if you have passion for something, you don't need a curriculum to go learn it. And that if you have somebody who's just obsessed with something with all the tools of the internet that they have, and this is why I'm so excited about homeschooling, especially for kids who have that innate drive and curiosity. And so when I was a kid, what I was obsessed with was getting cool baseball memorabilia. So I have two show and tell items, but part of the same thing. So what I would do is I would go, and this one's sort of the less exciting one, but like I have a baseball that's autographed by a lot of people on the San Francisco Giants. And so I would go to games, and for years, I would never leave the stadium until I caught a baseball. So my best baseball catching story is, and like these weren't like catching it off the bat, but I would go and I'd try to get them from the players. So I went to Wrigley Field in Chicago when I was in like probably fourth grade, and the Astros were playing the Cubs. And we were sitting by the Astros bullpen, like where all the players hang out. And I knew that. So what I did was I bought an Astros hat in Chicago for the Cubs game. And because I remember Darren Oliver was the starting pitcher that day, and because I was the only fan who was wearing the Astros hat, I walked out with 7 baseballs that night. And all the other kids were like, how did you do that? Like, most people don't even catch 7 baseballs in their life. So I got really good, and I like mastered the art of catching baseballs. Like, I literally caught hundreds. But then I was like, catching baseballs actually isn't that exciting. So then I used to get broken bats. And so this was a broken bat from a guy named Rich Aurelia. And so what I would do is I would go to the dugout and I would pay attention to who broke their bat during the game. And then I would go to the people in the Giants dugout and I would say, give me your bat. And these are probably worth hundreds of dollars. I have them all over the place. And that's my homeschooling little kid story.
That was really good. And I did not know that about you. Very persistent kid, right? You were obsessed with that. So you would go, you would go for those. That is hilarious.
I'm just like super persistent. I think I learned that as a kid, like, you know, getting these baseballs, getting these bats, like you don't need somebody to teach you these things. You can just sort of figure things out. And I think that when it comes to school, like a lot of the curriculum sort of implies like these are the things that you should know and the other stuff is kind of worthless and not that valuable. But I think that a lot of schooling and a lot of learning, not schooling, like schooling and learning aren't the same thing. I think that that's a really good place to begin this conversation. And a lot of learning just happens at home. So I'm curious, what is it for you about homeschooling that, why don't you sort of begin this conversation? I'll sort of flow with you.
Well, I'm a big fan of homeschooling, and I actually think that homeschooling is taking off for several reasons, and we can talk about those later. But the thing that really draws me to homeschooling is that kids and parents really get to like devise their own curriculum together. And that's when it starts to go from like education, like you were saying, to real learning, right? Because you start to pick and choose the things that are really valuable and how you want to do it. I also really like the fact that parents have and kids like a very flexible approach in terms of timing and assessment. So I don't know about you, but I am a morning person. But my sister, for example, is not a morning person. And the fact that we both had to be up and sitting down in the classroom at 7:30, I was probably absorbing everything at that time, but my sister's probably not absorbing everything at that time, right? Because we have different timings in terms of how we work. So the fact that homeschooling does provide this like flexible approach to timing and the approach of assessment, right? You don't need to do all these tests. You can tell if your kid is learning with other ways that are more flexible too. Then also the fact that you can move at their own pace according to all the kids' learning styles and their interest. And what I mentioned at the beginning with the sand dollar, that you can mold and shape the curriculum around the emerging interest of the kid. And this is so powerful because that's when real learning happens, not when you force the kid or you try to force the kid to learn, because you can't really force anyone to learn. You can force them to memorize something, but not to learn. So those are really the first things that come to mind. And I'm like, whoa, like homeschooling really provides. And again, I was a teacher for many years, and I'm much more in favor of this kind of learning experience, not education. But then again, of course, there's some challenges that come with this. And I don't know if you want to talk about them or if you want for me to talk about them.
Well, a couple comments. So I really like the idea that memorization is not learning. I think that a lot of what's happened in education and the place where it's gone wrong is that we've taken things that weren't the same word and then we've equated them as the same idea. So it's like, yeah, we want kids to learn, and memorization is a byproduct of learning. Therefore, let's just not focus on learning, only focus on memorization. And because memorization is a byproduct of learning, then they'll actually learn. But what you realize is that's kind of path dependent. Like there's two kinds of memorization. There's like pre-learning memorization, and then there's post-learning memorization. And post-learning memorization is a lot more valuable, right? Like I never memorized how to go catch baseballs, but if I walk into a stadium, I can just know exactly how to like game the system of the way a stadium is set up. And then when it comes to homeschooling, I remember, so big scooter guy. So like, unfortunately, the two cities that I live in the most, like I was living in New York and my family lives in San Francisco, not big scooter cities. And so whenever I go to LA, whenever I go to Washington, D.C., whenever I go to Austin, Texas, I scooter around. And I might have told this story before, but I was in D.C. and I was scootering, and we went by all the Smithsonian museums, the Museum of Natural History, or the Natural History Museum that is in D.C. I'm thinking National Geographic Museum. And I went by and I was like, if I was a kid, because all the museums in D.C. are free, I was like, if I was a kid, then my homeschooling could just be going to museums, and that would just be better than school. And I think that there's something within this of like the agency of homeschooling. Like what would be so cool about this isn't necessarily that you're homeschooling, but it's as simple as I want to learn this today. What is the best way to do that? And the thing is, so often we're like, oh, you know, you need the curriculum. That's no different from how I learn. Like, no different. The way I learn is I sit down at my computer and I'm like, what do I feel like reading right now? And then I do projects, and learning is the byproduct of those things. And those are the ways that I would focus on learning. It's why I like homeschooling.
Absolutely. And you know what that reminds me of? I've been having some conversations with some moms that do homeschooling just because I'm trying to really like get into this vibe because I'm really interested in it. And one of the things that one of the moms mentioned was that that is very different from school, that she takes Saturdays to plan with her two girls, right? One is 7 years old and the other one's 9. So on Saturdays, they take about an hour and a half, and they don't talk about, grades, because she doesn't consider their kid to be in grades like in school, but she does have like the curriculum that one of the schools, follows, just so that she kind of has a sense of what kids that are the age of her daughters are supposed to be learning. And then together with the kids, she'll kind of like pull the things that she finds relevant and that she knows that the kids are going to need. And then the kids decide, when they want to learn this. Like, okay, we need to learn all these things. What do you want to learn about next week? And then the kids have that agency and they say, oh, I'm really interested in this. So that's what she's like, in homeschooling, you need to take advantage of those excitement moments. Like when the kid says, I want to learn about that, boom, you have the interest, you have the motivation, you go with that. It's very different from school, right? In school, it's like, this is what we're learning today. And if it happens to match your interest, good for you, but that's not very common, right? So I love this idea of involving the kids in the planning on Saturdays, and then just kind of like, like saying what are we going to learn each day. And then she says that this also helps with that battle of, oh, today we're going to be learning this in math. No, the kid was the one who decided, okay, I want to learn this on Wednesday and I'm curious about this. So it starts to work very nicely in that way. And she also mentioned that she's very, very flexible in terms of, if one day the kid is very curious about something that was not in the schedule, she will put everything aside and then just focus on that thing that the kid wants to learn about. Because again, the kid is interested, and that's what you need in order for learning to stick. But parents kind of have this idea or this misconception that homeschooling, you need to be at home for 7 hours with your kid going over the textbook and this and that. But no, like learning can be, today we're going to the Met Museum. Today we're going to go to this place. And it can happen outside. It can be walking on the beach. Like there's so many ways for learning to happen, right? For real learning to happen.
So I really like that idea of excitement moments, because I get those all the time. Like I'll just get excited about something and boom, let's just do it. And sometimes I could be a little too fast in order to do stuff, but I think that's why I'm action oriented. And like for me, that is what makes learning fun. And people with our personality types, like we just get excited about things and then boom, we just sort of roar and just roll with that excitement. Beyond that, a couple comments. So I'm reminded of a conversation. I had a friend from college. His name was Brett Spelker. And Brett lived in a town west of New York called Madison, New Jersey. And I went to go visit Brett because I just stayed with him for the weekend. And I ended up talking to his 10-year-old brother. It was really interesting because he knew so much about history, like more than any adult I've met, 10 years old. And he could name you, like he went on this tirade about the origins of World War I. And I was like, how do you know all this? And he said, well, whenever I try to learn something, I start with this YouTube channel called Crash Course, which is amazing. I even like Crash Course. And then I just learn. And then I like go down other parts of YouTube and I just learn about history. And what's interesting is I feel like there's this dichotomy within homeschool of like, you want kids to do what they're passionate about. And I think that we agree on that. But the place that people have some trepidation is, wait, what about the common knowledge that a society needs or that kids need and stuff like that? This is probably the most controversial thing I'll say today, but I would rather start with the curiosity and work back towards the common than start with the common and then try to get people to be curious. And I feel like we want both in a society, but right now we start with the common and then we hope and pray for curiosity. But the thing is, I feel like in order to be part of a society, you want that kind of common knowledge. And if you are curious, you'll then ladder back to that. Now, with that said, there are certain countries, and like we could have a conversation that I think is beyond the scope of this, of like how important now is it for all Americans to have shared mythology, or all Panamanians to have shared stories, and for everyone to know the national anthem. I don't know. I mean, I think that that's an interesting conversation. But right now, what I'm seeing is people go to preschool, then they go to 12 years of K through 12, then they go to another 4 of college, and they're still not ready to work a job in a professional market. And I'm not even sure that the outcomes are that good. So what I do know is the system right now, I don't even think is on the right track. And like when people say, oh, education needs more money, look, that's not it. Like, education at this point, for the most part, does not need more money. Like, it is fundamentally on the wrong basic assumptions and axioms of how we should be teaching kids. And what I really like about the homeschooling conversation is even if it doesn't give us the right answer, like this is exactly what we should do, it's directionally very accurate.
I am going to 200% agree with your controversy. And I was thinking about this like a few days ago. David, that kid that is a skilled thinker and an adept learner that can adjust to whatever the future throws at that kid. What I mean is like that kid that had nurtured that curiosity over, memorizing facts or like learning in that way can like spackle those holes. Let's say that she has like some holes in her knowledge or he has some holes in his knowledge, and he knows how to acquire the skills that he or she needs in order to do the things that they want to do. But if you have that other kid who, just shoveled down his preparedness but lost his curiosity, whose, interests are just like, the kid doesn't even know what they're interested in, are just replaced by like this general things that we need to teach in school, that kid is going to have a really hard time, coming out of that. Because I just prefer a kid that's very curious and has a few holes in knowledge and knows what to do than that kid that memorized a bunch of things but lost that curiosity or just doesn't have that desire to learn that, for example, you and I have, or that excitement about things, right? So I totally agree that it's more important to nurture that curious side of the kid over like trying to overwhelm them with content. Absolutely.
Yeah, one thing I'm interested in is like there's sort of inflection points in the world. And when you get an inflection point, I think that you should look at something because something is about to change. So if we went back to 2008 and I would say, hey, I'm going to have a car pick me up at my house, going to take me across the city, and they'll show up to my house, private driver. I'll have the entire car to myself. They'll show up to my house within 5 minutes, and I can pick a standard car or I could pick a luxury car, and I could get all these different kinds of amenities. And guess what? It's such a premium service. I don't even have to give them my cash. I just walk right out without exchanging any money. They'd be like, damn, like, give me the number of that limousine company. That's just Uber. This is like a standard part of the modern world. And a limousine company would have been very high-end, very expensive. The same thing is about to happen to homeschooling. That what the internet is really good above everything else is it's a matching tool where it finds the needle in the haystack. It finds the person or the idea that is perfectly on your wavelength in a world of abundance. So Google goes out and searches the entire internet and gives you exactly what you want. If you go out and you search David PERELL on Google, you will go exactly to my website. Then you'll see rite of passage right next to it. Amazing. The same thing is about to happen in homeschooling, where until now, economic challenges, just like the limo, have prevented homeschooling from taking off. But in part because I'm an investor in one, in part because I have friends working on this, there are all these homeschooling startups that are allowing people to pool resources together for homeschooling. The technology of smartphones and computers finally gotten cheap enough. And my prediction is within the next 10 to 15 years, homeschooling, which is now seen as a luxury good. Oh, you have the money that one of your parents doesn't need to go work and can stay home. It's not how it's going to be anymore. It
Mm-mm.
is going to just be an alternative option. Yes, it will cost money, but the cost of it might go down 10x. And if a cost goes down 10x, the market can expand dramatically.
Yeah, and then also the fact that there are more parents nowadays working from home and like working remotely, and there are ways, especially with companies like Premier that are like making it really simple, like for parents to homeschool. There is a possibility now. It is possible for parents to work from home and homeschool, especially because it's a myth that you
Good
need to
point.
teach your kids for 7 hours a day. Like I've spoken to plenty of homeschool parents and they're like, this is a myth and it needs to be debunked. Like
Good
kids
point.
need up like when they're in first grade, max an hour and a half of direct learning a day. That's it. When they're in third and fourth grade, maximum 3 hours a day. And the rest of the learning happens in unstructured ways. They happen when the kids are playing, they happen when the kids are building something, when the kids are making a video and spending hours editing, when they go to the museum, when they go out to play, when they start, participating in sports, when they go to music, in art class. Like there are so many ways in which the kids are learning after that 1 hour and a half or 2 or 3 hours of direct instruction. So that frees up the afternoon for the parents to do other things and work. And the kids are still learning, but in more organic ways. So that's one part, right? Also, the fact that the cost of traditional education continues to rise. It just does. And the cost of alternative education is actually going down, but the quality of, for example, online courses and other forms of alternative education is going up. So when you think about it, it makes sense. And especially now that we're like living this remote life, to keep your kids at home and do it in a way that benefits them and also benefits you, and it's more cost effective. So there's also like that part. And it also reminds me of, many parents when they hear this, they're like, okay, I buy into that. But what about the socialization? Did I say it correctly? The kids being social,
Good
kind of.
enough. Good enough
Okay.
to keep going. Well done.
Okay.
I will teach the pronunciation
Okay. Thank you.
homeschooling
Yeah, oh,
course.
absolutely. Absolutely. In English, I'll do the Spanish or Portuguese.
I
So
can already
people
roll
want
my R's. So see, I got the Spanish one down too. ¿Verdad? Sí.
people want for their kids to be social, right? Like that's a big thing for them. And well, obviously, and for them to be able to like interact and live in the real world. But I think it's so funny. Like to me, this is one of the myths of homeschooling, and it can be debunked so easily because when you think about it, first in school, there's not a lot of socialization going on. Like there really isn't. Thank you. There really isn't. Like kids, when you ask kids like, well, when is the time where you're most socializing with your friends? They'll tell you in the bus. Like what? In the class, the teachers will even tell you, you're not here to socialize, you're here to learn. Okay. So they're not really socializing in classes. We've talked about how now many schools are doing quiet lunches, which I think it's ridiculous, but it's part of their, like behavior control. Recess across the, globally is been cut off. Like it's shorter and shorter and shorter. Like when I was a third grade teacher, there was a year when recess was 15 minutes. Like that's insane. In 15 minutes, you don't have time for
You
anything.
literally you
Especially
get to the playground, figure out the rules of the game, and it's over.
out. Yeah, so there is not a lot of socialization going on in school. But when you are being homeschooled, not only are you interacting like with you have many possibilities to interact, but also you're interacting with people of different ages. Like in real life, you're not just talking and interacting with kids your age, right? Here you get to talk to, that teacher that comes to teach cooking lessons on Wednesdays and she's older than you and you're interacting with her. You get to interact with the people in the museum that you went to. You get to go to the playground because again, you have all this flexibility and time that's free to play during the day because direct instruction is limited to a few hours. You go ahead and you're in sports, you're in, other extracurricular activities. So really like there's so many opportunities for you to socialize. So that's like another myth that's going around that I'm like, no, like that may be before, but now that's not really a thing.
I have a question, and honestly, this is a question. I don't know the answer to it. Here's what I would be very curious about.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that this gets into our last myth of homeschooling, which is that homeschoolers are at a disadvantage when trying to enter top universities and jobs. So hold that idea, but here's my question. So socialization basically is a one-way spectrum where the closer you get to socialization, the better. That's how we think about it. Like you're either not socialized or you are socialized. And what socialized basically means is I'm good enough at like understanding what other people want and sort of mimicking culture that I can get along with people and it can work out well. So like if you're not socialized, you're like not good at it, and you're just sort of like a freak or a geek or a weirdo. And then like once you get to socialization, like you can work with other people. But I actually am not sure that that's how it plays out. I think that you want to be socialized enough where you can get along, you can have a good conversation, you can date, you can have really close friendships, you can love your family, have a great conversation. No doubt about it whatsoever. You can work with other people. But I actually think that there's a way in which you can be over-socialized. And over-socialized means that you conform, that you do what other people tell you to do, that you just sort of go along with the crowd. And once again, I don't even know that this model is true. It's just my hypothesis. Because what, like you and I have a friend named Hannah Frankman, and Hannah was homeschooled. And Hannah, I really like Hannah because if we have a conversation, it flows, it's easy, she's good to talk to. But she also has all these kooky, weird, like one-of-a-kind ideas that are so uniquely hers. And I think that, like, in one very important way, she's actually under-socialized, and I think it's really valuable for her.
Well, again, I know Hannah well too, and one of the things that makes her so unique is that she's a big time reader. So that's like maybe a component in this, equation with her. But also, I feel like she's one of those people that has had the opportunity to bond and socialize in different ways, like not just with people in a classroom her age. So that's why, she's the way. And I also enjoy, she has so many topics of conversations, and it's interesting because I'm a big talker and she's also a big talker, but in a different way. She loves asking questions. She's so curious. She loves asking questions
So
and this and that. Yeah. And it's just, you're right. I had never thought about like the spectrum and socialization in that way. But I find it interesting. I feel like
Right, but
maybe
that's
also
how you are, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's why I like you, because you, like, you're not socially awkward in any way, but, like, you always have original ideas when we talk about school. And the reason why, when you were one of my Rite of Passage students, where I was like, yes, let's do it, was because you always had original perspectives. But honestly, I feel like if you go all the way and you follow the logical end of socialization, you just end up being so socialized that you're like the average of everybody, and you don't want that.
Yeah, I can see that. You grab from everything and you're just kind of imitating other people. I never thought about that. I like that. And let's now go back to that last myth that you talked about. And I actually did my research on this because I've been hearing around, like if I homeschool my kids, they're not going to have like the same opportunities as kids that go to school to, go into top universities and then go into good jobs. Here is what I found. I found that, and I'm going to talk about 4 top universities. Oxford welcomes applications from students who have been homeschooled. MIT has a long history of accepting homeschoolers, and they actually don't require a high school diploma or a GED from their applications, which I found really interesting. This is from their websites. Princeton welcomes applications from homeschoolers, and Harvard, this is really interesting. In Harvard, homeschooling is an educational asset that they consider favorably when making their admission process. So clearly, it's a myth that kids are not going to be able to, make it to universities if, they even want to do that by the time they get there. So that aside, maybe you can talk about, getting jobs. Like, I don't think that if you're homeschooled, you're going to have any issues either getting jobs. Like, it's just you did not get educated in a classroom. You got educated in the real world. To me, that's an asset, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd want to look into that data a little bit more. My baseball hit my headphones. Good job, David. So I want to look into that data a little bit more because I'd want to know like what percentage of kids are homeschooled and what percentage of kids go to Harvard. But still, like, let's just be honest here. Like, the point of life is not to go to Harvard. And don't
tell that to my husband.
The god of American childhood is literally college. And I'm not trying to say that Harvard is a bad thing. Like, that's not my point at all. Harvard rocks. I know that your husband went to Harvard, MBA, all that sort of stuff. But, like, I mean, is the goal even to get a job? Like, like you could just go and, like, college to get a job to live a good life. And, like, also, what about the 20 years that you spend just as a kid in school? Like, are we not going to value those? Like, say that you do marginally, and I don't believe this is the case, but say that you do marginally worse as a homeschooled child after you leave school. You do 5% worse, okay? But 20 or 25% of your life is spent in school. So, say that school itself is way better. Even if you do worse later, if you took like using a very sort of utilitarian sense on this, like what are the total like happiness points that I get in my life? Say that you just enjoy your childhood way more from homeschooling. There's actually a level in which you could have post life be worse and it would still be worth it. And like, it's like, are we going to obsess so much over your job and what happens then so that you can have a good retirement? Like, no. How about like maximizing the now, having an amazing childhood? And like, there's certain kids like me who just aren't cut out for school. And two like of us. And like, there's a lot of us in the world. So any closing comments as we finish off here?
Yes, well, just with finishing up what you're saying, I really do feel like many kids nowadays that are leveraging the internet and becoming citizens of the internet and learning about the things that they're interested in and not what, they only being stuck to school. I really feel like those kids are not going to need to continue that conventional path of going to college and getting a job. They're going to be creating their own jobs before they graduate from high school. Like, I am really convinced, because I think about myself and how curious I'm on how I have this work ethic and all this energy. Had I started doing all this when I was, 10, oh my God, I wouldn't be here right now. I feel like I wasted so many years and so much potential in school. And I am hoping that with all that's going on, more kids get an opportunity to start earlier. And we're going to be surprised. Like, this is my prediction, like we're going to look 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and we're going to have so many kids working for themselves before they graduate high school. Like, I really believe that. And doing things that they like.
We knocked it out of the park today.
Ah, yes, we did, but with a broken bat.
With a broken bat, but we're still hitting homers.
I love it.
Boom, 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 boom.
Great session.
Another episode of Show and Tell is in the books. Hey, we want to hear from you, so let us know in the comments what you're interested in. We'll try to get back to you and respond as fast as we can. But thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.